At first glance, this may sound like an unusually pessimistic view of technological development. Yet, in many ways, it captures a concern that feels increasingly familiar today. The rapid emergence of artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, and digital technologies promises almost limitless gains in productivity, efficiency, and innovation. These tools are reshaping how we work, how we produce goods and services, and how we live our everyday lives. But this acceleration also has a darker side. Technologies that enter our lives at an ever-increasing pace can have profound consequences for our physical and mental health, as well as for our working and social lives. A growing body of research already points to these risks. More broadly, the way technological change is currently organized often prioritizes optimization, scale, and economic efficiency over social and environmental considerations. In a digital economy shaped by winner-takes-all dynamics, innovation can reinforce inequality and concentrate power, unless it's deliberately guided by wider societal values. So, what exactly did Huxley mean? Perhaps he was pointing to the fact that technological development always presents us with choices. There are multiple paths ahead, and too often, we choose poorly or react too late. Technology can evolve so quickly that public policy struggles to keep pace, becoming reactive rather than anticipatory. As a result, societies are often left trying to catch up, pulled along by forces they no longer fully control. From a societal perspective, technological development does not automatically equate to progress. Progress is not inherent in technology itself. Rather, it is shaped by the decisions we make when confronted with major technological change. Those choices determine whether we move forward or slip backwards. Today, these questions carry renewed significance. The Fourth Industrial Revolution, commonly referred to as Industry 4.0, is defined by the rapid convergence of digital technologies and manufacturing. Automation, data, and connectivity lie at its core. The Industry 5.0 paradigm, however, represents something different. It's not about new technologies per se, but about rethinking how current and future technologies are used. It is a technopolitical concept that emerged in response to the potential economic, social, and cultural consequences of digitalization in industry and manufacturing. So, from the perspective of businesses wanting to adopt Industry 5.0's core principles of sustainability, resilience, and human centricity, what does this look like? And what does it mean for work, for skills, and for quality of life? The Upskill project has been built on these essential questions. So how do we ensure that industry's technological revolution is sustainable, resilient, and human-centric? By combining ethnographic insight, academic research, and practical experiments inside real companies, Upskill has explored how new technologies reshape work, how they interact with human judgment, tacit knowledge, and organizational cultures. And through this journey, one lesson stands out. Progress is not automatic, or perhaps more appropriately put, automated. It is something we must consciously guide.
All firms have a choice as to what sort of technologies they adopt. So if you're trying to automate jobs away, for example, or simplify processes or bring digital management systems in, for example, you have choices about what technologies to select, and then you have choices about how you implement them. So if the mindset is around Industry 5.0, then you wouldn't choose automating technologies, you choose augmenting technologies. So the technology begins with the demand for it in the firm. Industry 5.0 as a philosophy, as an approach, as an ethic, as a mindset, as good management practice, that would then shape how technology was adopted and what technology was adopted. And that makes all the difference. One company in particular I'm thinking of, they didn't have a unionized workforce. They're doing skilled work. But the competition is not so high. They were fairly unique in the market, and the customers would just pay what it costs for that product. So they were sort of a bit price insensitive. They weren't cost cutting all the time. And so it was very easy for them to choose to create a company which was, welcoming, in which you could progress, in which there was engagement. It felt more like a community. And they always made sure to pay above the union agreed rates in that country as well. So that was a strong signal to the workforce that you're important and we want you to stay. You don't get that in all firms. So there's context here, but there's also a choice. We also saw artisanal firms where it could have been a very nice place to work, but was not. The company was perceived as a person's personal fiefdom. They were very interested in what they called modernization, which to them meant automation, and they pursued that vigorously at the expense of the staff. And that was a choice that they, as the owner, made. They didn't have to choose that, but they did. So context is really important, but it's not the only driver. And I think we need to know and understand more about why does an owner, cadre of managers choose one path and not another, because it's probably a very subtle, drift one way or the other. I think the Upskill project, and like its sister projects, has done a great job in creating a space where firms could experiment with technologies, with ethnographers and technology support there, technologies they might not have experimented with in the past, and that's allowed them to take a few chances and find some technologies that work really well for them, and to reject technologies that didn't work well for them for various reasons. So I think the project's been great for that, and having ethnographers and social science researchers working shoulder to shoulder with the engineers has given us unparalleled access and insight to the innovation process and the adoption process.
Rather than focusing on machines alone, ethnography revealed the social and emotional dimensions of work, how people develop confidence in new tools, how they preserve and pass on tacit skills, and how managers negotiate the boundaries between old and new ways of doing things. Industry 5.0 cannot be understood from a distance. It must be felt, observed, and interpreted within the environments where work is done.
So ethnography is a good way of studying how technology is chosen, introduced, implemented, used, not used, discarded in an organisation, because the ethnographer, the researcher, joins the organisation in effect as an observer and possibly as a participant. That way they get very close to the action and they come to understand over a period of time how insiders think and act and the logic underpinning these actions in their words, using their concepts and their vocabulary. So they get an insider's view of how things actually work in the organisation, which is always different. We've always known this for a long time in organisational research, that you can, a lot of research work in our field in business and management says how things should happen. Ideally, it's a very polished view. It never happens exactly as intended. There's always unintended consequences.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just basically echoing what you've said. I think one of the values of ethnography is also, especially with what we have done, right? It was not just observation, so we were not just there, but we also tried stuff ourselves. And I think that is really a core, benefit that ethnography can bring. Is simply trying stuff out yourself and feeling what a new machine requires of you. And I think that is, you don't get that from any other method. Like, you have to be there, you have to try it out yourself. And I think that was really, a good approach.
Absolutely.
From this project to try it out that way, because otherwise you get very dry accounts of, okay, the technology is implemented and it didn't work, but, well, why? Why did it not work? Maybe were the requirements too high? Like what skill, you've mentioned tacit skill, what is actually required of this, and who can do that and who maybe can't?
Technology implementation is not just about plugging in new machines or installing software. It's about weaving technology into the fabric of an organization. Our research has shown that successful technology implementation is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It requires a deep understanding of the unique needs, challenges, and opportunities within each organization.
The manufacturing execution system was implemented back in 2021, and it was kind of misunderstanding by the operators that this system is there to control them. But actually, with this project, with the upskill project, we really turned that into like this system is like to help you do your work in a better way. It's to help the managers take better decisions. It just turn it the focus area from the point of view of the operator. What's in it for you? So we tried to create that kind of material, basic material, let's say, to answer the why. First of all, why we need this technology. Then we need to answer the how, because we felt that there was kind of, you're not confident how to use it. Am I well trained? Do I have the right instructions? Is there someone to support me? So also all these questions comes along the way, because it was findings in the ethnographic studies as well. It was findings in the research that Peter was involved in. Also. So what we found that, we need to answer these questions to make them feel that they are more comfortable to use the system. Why we have the technology, how we use the technology, who will help me if I need help. So these packages were really important to be in place. And then also, the next step after that, we need to have hypercare. So we need to go down to the shop floor, and that was also a recommendation by Anna Olin, that go closer, be there, be in the shop floor, see how they are working and how the system can match with what they are working with. So it's more or less the upskill project, I can say, it pulls the attention to the shop floor and make it more like how it can meet with the system. I would say that first of all, the awareness increased. We started to talk the same language. We started to talk about the same understanding, because if I tell you, like, please tell me the definition of a certain technology, you will have your own definition. I'm having my own definition. But after these trainings, we all have the same understanding. So when we talk about something, we understand each other more. And that make more relief and more trust both ways, vertically around the company, that the managers know the same thing like the operators know the same thing like the IT/OT that's supporting the system, and we all know the same thing why the central team implemented the system from the very beginning. So we kind of transfer the knowledge, unified the language between us, what are we talking about, so that makes it easier that we can take small steps ahead. So we're looking at the same direction.
There have been success stories and failures, but one thing remains constant when choosing whether to implement or not to implement new technologies. There is a need for thoughtful planning, effective communication, and a commitment to continuous learning.
That throwing more technology at it is not going to change anything. I think if we think about Industry 5.0, like the entire aim of it was to shift the focus a little bit away from technology, right? Because it was like, that was the entire idea of Industry 4.0. We don't want more and more automation anymore. We want a little bit of a human purpose maybe in there, and like ecological sustainability, resilience, all of these sorts of things. But somehow in our cases, it was still very evident that the technology remained the center of attention to a certain degree. And I think now it's time, as we've done with our ethnographic method, it's really time to pay more attention to the social, cultural surroundings that this technology enters into.
I think also what we could say is something about the difference between our cases. So we've got one very large motor manufacturer in a highly competitive global environment. You know, every second on an assembly line counts. Every job cut saves a little bit of money. That's the business it's in. It's shaving time and shaving cost. And at the other end, so lots of resources, but hyper competitive. And at the other end, we have much smaller companies, they're very they're embedded in local communities and markets where people are personally known to them. They have much less in the way of expertise about technology and resources to spend on them. So it's very different. The sort of things that they choose to do or can't do are very different because of those constraints and enablements. But at the same time, what seems to be common is, a good manager will know his or her staff. They will appreciate the skilled work that goes on and recognise it and value it and foster it. Now, that isn't anything new in a sense. It isn't anything to do with this new technology. That's something that has always been the case. So in a sense, we haven't found anything groundbreaking, but it is still what workers, employees most value.
Ethnographic research showed that progress is rarely linear, and that skilled workers play an active role in shaping the integration of new technologies. This challenges the assumption that digitalisation simply replaces skill. Instead, it highlights the complex ways in which digital and manual capabilities interact.
So the usual way that we would think about technological change and industrial revolutions 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 is a new technology comes along and that changes the way that we organise production and consumption in a society. Particularly we're interested in the production in the factories, in manufacturing. What we've found on this project though is that it's not technology just that's driving change in a single direction, so that cobots come to replace robots, come to replace human workers. Rather, what we saw is what we could call a strange mixed ecology. We have technologies, but some of those technologies are new and some of them are still old. In most of the manufacturing sites we went to, we saw machinery that was going back to the 1950s, some even older. Even at really advanced automotive manufacturing systems with highly automated assembly lines, there'll be a tool shop somewhere. And in that tool shop, there'll be a traditional machine lathe that people will use to finish products that are coming off a 3D printer. Because although the 3D printer has a part in that ecology, it doesn't finish things to the kind of standard and level that you might need. It also doesn't necessarily understand how that part is going to be used. So you still need the skills, the intelligence and the knowledge and expertise and experience of the toolmaker to take the piece that the 3D printer has made and turn it into something that's actually useful and usable in the situation. So we see this as a strange mixed ecology, not just because it's a play on the small and medium-sized enterprise, another way of thinking about SMEs, but because what we see are traditional analog skills and technologies sitting in combination alongside digital and coding, not simply being replaced by them. So I think what's really interesting when you talk about the craft and the artisanal is we'd expect that from something like an artisanal fountain pen manufacturer, for example. We would expect there to be some kind of handmade craft. That's almost a part of the brand promise. You're going to get something that's authentic, that's traditionally made. It's got a strong Italian historical reputation behind it. So that's built into the actual product, and we kind of expect that. But even when you go to those organisations, you'll see high technology, you'll see computer-controlled laser engraving equipment, you'll see automated mobile robots actually taking the parts around the factory, servicing those artisanal workers that are doing the handwork. What was perhaps more surprising for us is even when you go to the most fully automated automobile manufacturing plants, you'll also still find people that have what we could call that craft orientation, that kind of ethos of craft and that traditional skilled artisanal knowledge that comes from doing a traditional trade apprentice as a tool maker or a pattern maker. And those skills are actually what enabled the new digital technologies to really be integrated. They don't just disappear. What's also quite difficult perhaps, and I think often managers miss this, and it's something that's quite important, is there's a real aesthetic dimension to that. When you take a traditional trades apprenticeship, you come to the end and you create your masterpiece. And that means you've mastered the craft because you're demonstrating all of the skills and elements that are built into that masterpiece. It shows that you can accomplish all of those. But it also demonstrates a certain aesthetic sensibility. You're creating something that's quite beautiful. And in all the cases, all of the companies, even those making industrial units like gas burners that would go and disappear inside a coffee roasting machine, they were concerned and interested with how it looked, how it appeared, even if that wasn't the final product. So there's something there that combines the engineering aesthetic sensibility that's always more than just the digital. We already have a lot of the human centrism. In fact, if we try to get away from the humans, we very quickly find that the automation technologies don't work when they stand on their own. I'm old enough to remember the discussions of the lights out for car factory from way back in the days of the 1980s. We were promised that there would be these human workerless factories where you wouldn't even have to put the lights on so you could save the electric bill because the robots would just do everything. I mean, aside from the fact that robots need visual systems and light themselves to operate, those just haven't happened because there's something inherently residual but necessary about the human dimension of that kind of work. So we sort of already have it. The question is whether management can then make that paradigm shift to recognizing it, or will continue to focus on the latest new technology, AI, or whatever is the flavor of the month, in order to try to automate out those roles. That paradigm shift needs to change away to recognizing that actually our humans are a really important and valuable part of the organization, not just a cost that sits in your balance sheet at the end as a cost to be minimized and automated out or replaced if possible by technology, which appears in your balance sheet as an investment.
Technological change requires more than investment in equipment. It requires thoughtful leadership. Upskill has shown that managers play a crucial role in bridging technology and people, both by guiding technological development and by nurturing human capability.
Fond of quoting Martin Parker, a UK professor, academic, who suggests that we bulldoze all of the West's business schools and start again, because all of our business schools are sort of shaped by the neoliberal era of shareholder value, etc. So it's very hard to break out of that kind of mindset and thinking and form of education to start thinking about, to shift that. So maybe we do need to start again and think about how we train our managers as professionals, as ethically minded, as having a professional ethic that it's not good enough for Europe just to subsist on driving wages down and making working conditions worse, or automating work and creating a cadre of jobless. That's not going to get the European economy, anywhere. And that's kind of obvious to everybody, perhaps except present shareholders. So, without directly attacking capitalism, we do need a different kind of capitalism. And we have had it in the past. The post-America, Sweden, we had this kind of shared prosperity model, which was all about worker engagement, all about paying decent wages and, sharing the prosperity from industry. So there have been periods in Western history where we've thought very, very differently. Don't forget neoliberalism, and neoliberalism is really very much entwined with Industry 4.0, with the technologies of surveillance, the technologies of automation. They're entwined and shaped by that mindset. So we somehow have to start training managers away from that mindset. It'll be slow, but it has to happen. Even in large companies like big motor, big car company, really that's a collection of relatively small production units. I mean, some huge production units, but a lot of small production units where the workers all know each other and they know the managers and they have their own culture and their own way of doing things. So managers in that context can choose to argue for the protection of that workforce against certain technologies, to build a culture in that unit. And we saw different cultures within different units across the same firm. So different values, different ways of working. So even at that level, even when you're getting pressure from, all the way from shareholders down through head office, you need to do it this way, you need to squeeze more profit, out of this product or whatever, or get costs down. Managers still have choices. and that's important. And I think we forget that. We shouldn't see this as some kind of mechanistic, well, they have no choice. No, they do. They do have choices. And so, one of the things we'd like to talk about and that we are planning is managerial education, so that managers do understand that they have choices, that they can push back. And this has been one of the questions I've been asked in presentations to a collection of sort of young female managers actually in industrial firms. This is great, but how do I persuade my senior managers that this is great? And we had a long conversation. I didn't come to any firm conclusions, but but we can work with that. So then you get into the realm of politics and influence within the organisation. So how can managers young managers, new managers coming through, who have a different ethic, a different mindset, how can they make their presence felt and start to have influence?
The Industry 5.0 mindset offers opportunities to design workplaces that value human judgment as much as technical precision, to protect tacit and embodied knowledge, and to ensure that technological change enhances rather than undermines meaningful work.
I think the biggest take home that we've brought in is this complicated idea of the strange mixed ecology, that we're not simply on a linear trajectory towards Industry 5 or possibly 6, 7, 8, whatever might come next, but that we see these internested. So you never quite replace the previous paradigm, and that craft, that artisanal, analog kind of work and ethos and skills are still important alongside understanding the digital, that we're not simply just replacing one with the other. But I think there are also some really interesting questions that follow from that for managers. So the implications for managers are that they need to recognise the skills that their employees actually have, which is something that also quite often disappears because of digitalisation. Increasingly, we're seeing managers manage their plants through complicated enterprise resource planning systems or information systems, where they're looking at the data that are generated by people and production systems, rather than what the people are doing to put that production system into action. So getting out and walking the shop floor sounds like a really obvious thing to do, but spending time with the workers, like we did as ethnographers in the factories, will give people a renewed understanding and appreciation of the skills that their workforce have. And I think that's the key to really getting the best out of the new technologies. And finally, I think the implications for policymakers are really important as well. One thing we've seen, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, is that they don't always have the absorptive capacity, the knowledge, the capabilities, and perhaps also the finance to really be able to utilise all of these new technologies. And when they do, they're trying to develop that and then buy something and put it into action in their organisation. What they really need to do is get the workers themselves engaged to think, well, how could we use this? So what's really necessary, I think, is something like a test bed site, the kind of thing that can be provided, for example, by the MAID laboratories in Milan, by the MITC in Sweden, or by the TWI in the UK, where small and medium-sized businesses can bring their workers in to use the new technologies, to experiment with them, to play with them, and to see what they can do to engage those craft and artisanal skills that are often embodied and hard to articulate alongside the new technologies so they can be utilised, and then make the decisions about what are the technologies that are appropriate for them and how they might be able to use them to improve their business.
The transition toward Industry 5.0 is not straightforward. It raises fundamental questions about professional ethics, economic organization, and the nature of technological progress itself. Progress, we have learned, requires more than technology. It also requires a new way of thinking about business strategy and how we organize our economy.
So the European economy has a number of challenges. It is slowing down in terms of growth relative to its competitor economies in China and the US. We need a solution to that, which is more productivity, of course. But there are then options as to how you achieve that productivity. You can drive wages down. You can put workers in a position where they have to work harder and harder, so acceleration in effect. So the kind of Tesla model of making a buck, if you like. You take it out of the workers, basically. And then the next step is, for Tesla being a good example, actually, is then you just automate the workers away as much as you possibly can. We need to employ people in Europe because Europeans buy products. and keep the economy going. So people need paid jobs, and they need good jobs. So they need well-paid jobs, they need skilled jobs. So how do we achieve that? Well, we do achieve that partially through technology, and we focus on augmenting technology, which is well integrated into the workplace, and adopted properly and carefully and exploited. Quite often technologies get adopted and they're not really exploited. They have all this functionality that doesn't get exploited. Well, if your workers are engaged, it's your Industry 5.0 model, and playing with the technology and making suggestions and really feeling part of things and shaping how the technology is used, then you get more out of the technology. If you think about this, the successful economies are really based on their ability to absorb and exploit better than their competitors technologies that usually already exist. I mean, the competition between the US and Britain during the Industrial Revolution is a case in point. The technologies were British for the most part of the Industrial Revolution. The Americans took them and exploited them better. They showed us how to do it, kind of follow our advantage, if you like. So Europe needs to think, I think, in terms like that. There's plenty of technologies out there. AI is being feverishly produced by, American companies, but we can use that, and we need to get better at adopting and exploiting this technology to produce productivity which doesn't destroy jobs, doesn't make jobs undoable in terms of acceleration and pressure and burnout and that sort of thing. If we can get that balance right, then the economy will be successful. That has to be our route, because if we don't take that route, then we're also giving up our values of good work, decent standards of living, people paying tax, welfare system, free healthcare, all of these sorts of things. They need to be paid for by workers who are employed in companies that are producing products that people want, but are produced productively using technologies and place themselves in the market. Europe already has a great reputation for quality. We need to exploit that more. We need to follow that up, and we can do that best with an engaged workforce who spot errors, who see better things, better ways of doing things, who really attend to quality and don't just feel pressured by having responsibility for it. And managers need to listen to the workforce about those issues, and then things go quicker, things get better. So that's how we can succeed, and Industry 5.0 is really at the heart of that sort of thinking.
As the Upskill project draws to a close, one message remains clear. The future of the industry is not predetermined. It will be shaped by the choices we make about technology, about work, and about what we value as progress. Technology offers us many opportunities to progress and improve our lives. But in equal or perhaps even greater measure, it provides pathways to go backwards. Industry 5.0 is a framework for a more sustainable and resilient European economy, aligning technological innovation with human skills and creativity. With continued collaboration between researchers, firms, policymakers, unions, and workers, this vision can become a reality. A brave new world, if you will.